Hey everyone, it's Types, and I was going to make a video today talking about stadiums in the Pokemon TCG and how they're really interesting and cool and really unique compared to other types of cards and trainers in the Pokemon TCG. And I actually did make a video on that previously, kind of. You see, I made a video kind of talking about stadiums, but I talked about their missed potential. And there was one card, though, that really stood out as being very interesting and well designed, in my opinion, which is the Stadium Artazon. Artazon is a card that is in the standard format. It is rotating out, so it's actually not in standard in Japan and, leaving the format soon. But it is a card that's played a lot, and I think people like it. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts in the comment section on whether you like this card or you're neutral, or I guess if you dislike it. I haven't really heard any people say that they think it's like unfun to play with or against. Honestly, I haven't really heard much talk about power level either, which I think means that it's pretty balanced. I mean, it's certainly not the best card in the game. It is pretty sure the best stadium in the game, but it is interesting. Of course, stadiums, if you're not familiar, they are a type of trainers you can see on the card here. Also, and if you didn't know this, in the lower right-hand corner of a card, I think it might change where this is on the card by era. But anyways, it says what the card does, or like that card type does. So, for example, stadiums, you can play, one during your turn. Then you put into play next to the active and discard if another stadium comes into play. And a stadium with the same name can't be played, right? So essentially, it's a once per turn thing, kind of like a supporter, I guess. But there aren't really decks um, that play a lot of stadiums, especially different stadiums, because again, you can't bump a stadium with the same name. I will mention if there's a way to bump a stadium through the use, or I guess, or like remove it through the use of something like, say, Blowtorch. You could then play another stadium, like, if your opponent played an Artazon, you could use the Artazon, remove it with Blowtorch, and then play another Artazon to use the effect twice. That's like kind of cool, but that's very niche. But ultimately, it's a small part of decks, right? There's not that many stadiums in the game compared to items and supporters, and they, of course, they interact with players, between players, a lot more than other card types, right? And normally you have a card that does something, and then you play, and then it's done. And obviously, some trainers interact with your opponent a bunch, like, say, boss's orders, switching your opponent's active to the bench. Um, a very powerful card that does interact with your opponent, but it's not something that they are making a choice about. Unlike with Artazon, where, it says that it's funny that it doesn't say that like both players can use the stadium with that like rules text at the bottom right there, but it does say on every card, which seems like I don't know. I'd put it in like the general rules, but anyways. So every turn, either player can use, or the players whose turn it is can use Artazon, and they can make a decision there, and like do something. So it's a really interesting resource that both players have access to, and this is what makes stadiums interesting, and what makes Artazon interesting, and makes other stadiums not so interesting as well. But boss orders, you don't really have that. Same thing with like Iono. Iono is obviously a very powerful supporter, and interacts with you, interacts with your opponent, and can do some cool stuff. It can do some powerful stuff. It can do some annoying stuff. But ultimately, you're more or less in control of it. Your opponent doesn't really have any control outside of, I guess, like kind of like going about prize mapping and in like their speed in the prize race and things like that, right? So ultimately, there's a little bit of interaction, and then there are other cards like, say, Nimona, which is draw 3, or Professor's Research, just go ahead and draw 7, and these cards are like not interacting with your opponent at all, outside of the fact that you're obviously playing against each other, so anything you do changes like the game state and the board state, so then your opponent might have to react. But ultimately, there's some interaction with these trainers, but not really decision making from your opponent. There are cards like, say, Repel. I don't know why. I guess I thought of Escape Rope, and I was like, Repel is like Escape Rope. This card is pretty bad. I'm not gonna lie. Tell me in the comment section if you actually played with or against this card. I don't think I have. It's not very good. You switch your opponent's active to the bench, but they choose. Their opponent is making a choice on your turn. Ultimately, there are other card games that have a lot more interaction and decision making from your opponents, and I'd say that can be it adds more depth to the game, but it means that there's a lot of things to keep track of, and makes the game a bit like potentially bogged down, or something that you're like kind of losing track of, specifically for newer players, it can be a lot, but even not for newer players, it can be a lot as well. But with a few of these things in Pokemon, it is fun, right? You're not playing like five repels in a turn, or your opponent isn't going to be making more than two decisions a turn. I guess the decision, which is kind of the same as repel, is if your opponent's active is knocked out, they decide which Pokemon to send up. This is not a very difficult decision, usually, or a meaningful decision. I mean, it's like a somewhat meaningful decision. Um, but usually in that case, it's pretty obvious, right? It's like, oh, I send up my main attacker, or like a pivot, right? But ultimately, or like you don't have any good choices, and then it doesn't really matter. So ultimately, these decisions are pretty straightforward. And Artazon isn't a super complicated decision either. This is a decision being made on their turn as well, right? So it's something you do on your turn that affects their turn, unlike the other types of cards, which only, as I said, happen when they're played. So teams do some pretty interesting things there, and they are the same for both players as well. Like Iono is kind of the same for both players as well. Obviously. I was talking about like press card stuff. And with that, you can manipulate it to be in a better spot for you, and your opponent can also play around with that. And obviously, it's a card that's played in most decks, so both players are thinking about that generally quite a bit. But something like Artazone, you can also try to take advantage of it more. And I guess I didn't say what it does. It allows you to search your deck for a basic Pokemon without a rule box reveal it, or not reveal it, but you put it onto your bench. So yeah, you just get any Pokemon that's not a rule box, that is a basic, put it onto your bench, which is good for setting up. I will say one thing that I do like about this card as well, which is true with Iono as well, and just like, I mean, a bunch of cards. This is a pretty generic thing, but it helps you set up, and especially with Iono, it helps both players set up, along with Artazone, which is nice. Ultimately, fun games are games where both people set up. If you don't get to set up, you don't really play the game, right? And that's not very fun. So Artazone helps both players play the game. In that sense, it makes it a lot worse than a card like Nest Ball, for example, or any of the other top ball search cards. Because this, it allows you to search your deck for any basic, put it onto your bench. Yes, technically, Artazone can get multiple cards, which is nice. It can like be searched off of different things. I don't know. It's probably easier to search for a Nest Ball than Artazone, to be honest. But ultimately, they have some differences. But for the most part, Nest Ball is just going to be like better than Artazone. Except for the repeated thing, depending how much you think it'll stick around and how much value you're getting out of it by it sticking around. But obviously, Nest Ball doesn't help your opponent, right? So that helps balance out Artazone, right? Like Nest Ball, and Nest Ball's not a card to hear anyone like complain about like ever, but it is kind of overpowered, right? I'd say Artazone is not overpowered. It's played a lot, but it helps your opponent a lot as well. And it does help specifically evolution decks and or single prize decks, which historically they've been kind of okay. Single price decks are still bad, right? There aren't really any particularly good single price decks in standard. There are some that are okay. And then there are a lot that are just really bad compared to multi-price decks, which most of the metagame is multi-price decks. The average multi-price deck is better than the average single-price deck by a bunch. But anyways, Artazone does encourage some cool gameplay patterns, which I did want to, or deck building patterns, I guess, which is cool. Ultimately, as I said, it's not like super broken, so this isn't going to be changing the metagame that much, but it is cool. But then obviously, interacts with your opponent, and your opponent can take advantage of it, and essentially every deck of the game can get value out of it. Technically, every deck of the game can get value out of it because, well, okay, I guess you can't get value out of it. Like you can't, I guess. This is also a ruling thing that not everyone knows. So obviously what it does is it puts a Pokemon onto your bench. If you don't have any bench space, you can't use this. So if you do though, you could just like use it, even if you don't have any valid types in your deck. Assume you have at least a card in your deck. It needs to be like, I guess, how do I say this? Theoretically possible to succeed. If you're in a situation where you have no cards in deck or no bench space, it's impossible. But other than that, I'm pretty sure you can use it. And so then that situation, you can go ahead, you can use Artazone, and then you could like fail it, right? You could just fail it. And what it does two things. It allows you to search your deck, which is useful. I'm someone who doesn't really prize check. I like prize check a little, but honestly, I'll kind of just look. Especially if I have a card like Artazone here, letting me search my deck whenever or like every turn. I'll use Artazon to, check my prizes for the card I need like that turn or whatever. Um, to make sure that's there, and then I could actually go for it. So that is useful. And then it shuffles your deck. Shuffling your deck can be good or can be bad. To be honest, it's pretty inconsequential. Um, it's used after, I've been talking a lot about Iono, but certainly after Iono, it can allow you to shuffle your deck to put the cards that were previously on the bottom back into maybe not the bottom, hopefully, so that you can then draw them. So it can like help your odds. Honestly, this like more I describe it as more complicated sequencing, which is like complicated sequencing like this. It's not like absurdly complicated, but it's also not very consequential there. But if I did want to mention that, which is a cool thing that you can do with this card, but obviously the actual use is like to get a card and a Pokemon onto your bench to help you set up or to help you stay in game. So it has cool patterns to it. But then looking at the other stadiums in standard, we can look at them. There are currently 37 apparently. Oh yeah, I remember I did the video where I did the worst cards in standard. By the way, with that one, the worst too. I said the worst celebratory fanfare and Paradise Resort, um, which I've like. I mean, I haven't seen people play a good few of these cards, right? Actually, I don't know. Looking through, I think I might have actually seen people play all of them except for those two, funnily enough. But they're like super hard to obtain as well. They're like purposely bad. It's kind of weird. But anyways, most of the stadiums are onto one of two categories. I think this isn't quite the right classification, but I've recently made a video going over type specific cards, and there are a bunch of type specific stadiums here, which I don't love that much, which is probably surprising to some people because my channel is 10 types. I like the types, but I like being able to creatively deck build. So a card like Spikemouth Gym isn't super interesting. Yes, technically you can do all the stuff, or the two things I said with the Artazon, the shuffling your deck, the searching your deck with Spikemouth Gym, but right, like no deck's gonna use this except for a Marnie's deck, right? In terms of actually like getting real value out of it, right? So it's not really an interesting card. It kind of takes away the point of the stadium. I mean, you get the value of being able to use it multiple times, though to be honest, you mostly need to use it twice, maybe once. I don't know. Like, sure, getting the third and fourth search are going to be like good, I guess, but they're not that useful, right? So essentially, it's just like an item search card, which is like fine. It kind of helps out the Marnie's deck, which is fine. But being a stadium doesn't really matter too much. It matters for a few things like Secret Box or whatever. But ultimately, Marnie's or Spike with Gym, which works with Marnie's, is just like a random card. It doesn't really matter. It's a stadium. Same thing for I don't know if I wouldn't say it's the same thing for Granite Cave. Also, there are like two types of stadiums in another categorization. You have Granite Cave and Spikemouth Gym. Granite Cave reduces damage that Steve's Pokemon take, and then Spikemouth Gym is kind of like Artazon, letting you search for a Pokemon on use. So you have stadiums that you can like choose to use versus ones that provide these passive effects. This is kind of like Pokebodies, or I guess Pokepowers versus Pokebodies, which we saw a long time ago in the Pokemon TCG, which was a distinction between the two different types of Pokemon powers, which are like abilities, but with some, I guess, different things that can happen there. Ultimately, though, a lot of these games are either type specific or very deck specific as well, which is a little boring. Artazon, though, is not like that. Any deck can use it realistically, unless you're something like some like serious Raging Bull deck without like Noctowl, something weird like that. I don't know. But essentially every deck in the game can make use of it, which is interesting. There aren't really any other stadiums like that either. There are, I guess there's Mesagoza. Mesagoza is like also usable by every deck in the game, but it's a coin flip. I don't really like coin flip cards. I don't think most people really like Mesagoza. Some people do like coin flip cards. I mean, okay, I should clarify. I think like big coin flip cards or flipping a bunch of coins is like kind of fun and silly. But these like big swingy coin flips aren't super fun. Basically, I did see some play. Oh, it's still seeing play apparently though. I personally wouldn't play it. But then you have Town Store as well. Town Store gets a tool. This is like pretty versatile, but like not every deck can use it, and decks definitely use it to a wide variety of different power levels. And like the floor for Town Store is gonna be, I mean, I guess honestly, Town Store is a lot weaker or is weaker essentially in every deck than Artazon, in terms of what it does to help it. Obviously, it doesn't mean it's a worse card than Artazon, though I'd say it is a worse card than Artazon. But because it helps both players, you want it to help you more than your opponent, and help you a lot and help your opponent a little, or none at all. But Town Store, even in tool-heavy decks, tools aren't going to be as impactful as Pokemon in those decks, really. I'm trying to think. I mean, yeah, Town Store is it's fine, and like Mega Absol, you got the TMs, which are like, I mean, you have TM Turbo Energize, which is, I guess, is pretty important, right? It is an important card. That being said, like, I don't know. You also have like your Arvins. I don't know. I do like Town Store. Town Store's a fun card, but yeah, you got Town Store. As I said, you got Mesa Goza, which is kind of like that, and then you have stuff like each card, I guess, reduces retreat cost to basics, but obviously that's, I'd say more deck specific. Stuff like Air Zero Underdepths, theoretically, it's pretty deck specific, but there's a lot of decks that play Terras. But then the upside of increasing your bench space is like kind of meh. Ultimately, there's a lot of weird cards like this that have theoretically some value for any deck. Academy at Night is something like that, where like technically any deck can get value out of it to like Iono proof yourself, but that's like pretty niche because it um kind of removes a draw. So that's kind of bad. It kind of depends. It can be like fine, but it can be quite bad as well. So ultimately, there's a lot of stadiums that are kind of meh here. And tell me in the comment section if you disagree, if you think there's another stadium in standard that's really interesting for both players consistently. But I think Artazon really succeeds there. It provides a powerful effect as well. If there was a stadium that was like I mean, something like Beach Court is a pretty mediocre effect, but you could have something even worse. Maybe it's like I'm trying to think of something that's like good, but not like super good. Or like having any form of synergy or like specific synergy. Just cannot think. Maybe it's like once per turn, draw till you have one card in hand. That's a little deck specific. I mean, realistically, like no deck's ever gonna. I mean, most decks aren't ever gonna be able to be in that situation where they're gonna be using it. It's not really a good place to be. But something like that, like a bad Rose Tower. Not that Rose Tower was that good, but ultimately, I feel like the fact that Artazon provides something useful and powerful and interesting that both players want to use, it feels like a really fun card. And it feels good to play with and against. It can feel a little bad to help out your opponent, but it doesn't feel too bad. And you end up playing more games of Pokemon per game of Pokemon, if that makes sense. You're not going to find these games where nothing really happens as often with this card. But tell me in the comment section if you do like Artazon, if you think it's cool, if you're sad it's rotating, or if you're happy it's rotating. As I said, I haven't really heard much talk about this card. I think because it's well designed, but I hope you agree, or if not, tell me in the comments. But I hope you enjoyed, and as always, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell, all the good stuff, and I'm always excited to see you in the next video.